Hello, it's your friend Double Bite. I should be sleeping right now. It's like 1 a.m. on October 2nd, but I had this idea percolating. So this is going to be a two-part video, and by that I mean I'm recording part one now instead of sleeping, and then in theory maybe I'll remember that I want to do a part two, and then do that and then upload it. So Maple Hoof, as one of my friends that I've mentioned a couple times, posted on Twitter about World of Warcraft and how he had just gotten to a part where there's a new region of the game. He was excited for it, and then when he got there, it felt samey. Um, and that kind of just struck me as interesting. And I think the thing that really caught, I wish I'd recorded this when I first thought of it 2 hours ago, because I'd be a lot more coherent, but that's not my style. Coherency is overrated. Anyway, I mentioned the idea of it's supposed to be the same because this is the core gameplay loop. This is the core World of Warcraft experience that I'm still getting, but it's a new area and it doesn't feel new. And that kind of struck a chord with me because I've noticed that a lot of games that I kind of get interested in or lose interest in have had some of the similar issues. And I think there's a couple of cool things at work here. There's the idea of player expectation, which I kind of talked about a little bit in my last video. There's the idea of player advancement. How does a player feel like they're going forward when they play a game? And there's a couple other cool things going on. So the first thing I want to talk about, this video, I want to talk about the idea of, which is I'm kind of starting with the tangent and then going to the actual thing, because I think with the tangent will help clarify my thoughts on the actual thing. So the actual thing I'm thinking of is, how can we make something that's repetitive fresh? What can we do when thinking of game design to make the core gameplay loop stay satisfying over time and innovate on it in ways that are somewhat static, right? Rather than introducing crazy new things, how do we keep the same thing feeling good? And I think this is we can get some nice generalized things from that, because I've been thinking of examples as diverse as platformers versus JRPGs, and I'm having a lot of thoughts about this, which is always exciting. But the thing I want to talk about first, which is the tangent, so if you want the meat of the subject, I guess just wait till the other video. The tangent that I'm thinking of is player gating, where player is forbidden from doing something until a certain point in time. Why am I thinking of this? Well, first of all, the new area in World of Warcraft that Maple was mentioning, it's supposed to feel like a reward. You advance to this point in the game, you get to go to this other part of the game. That's a reward. That's something that you were blocked from before. And it should feel rewarding. And in this case, the reward is content. And I think that's interesting because there are a lot of different kinds of rewards in games. Getting points is a reward. Getting loot from a boss is a reward. But content is an interesting kind of reward because in a way, ignoring things like microtransactions and DLC and stuff, in a way, you're getting rewarded with more game. You played for an hour and you played an hour-long game, and your reward was another hour of game. In a weird sort of way. So the idea, because that's how your brain is treating it, right? It's a new area, it's supposed to be a new thing. If it was a smooth transition, maybe you wouldn't feel like it needed to be new because you're still playing the same thing. But the fact that it was gated from you means that this new thing is in some way special. And I was trying to think of different kinds of gates in games, and I thought of two kind of spectrums. They're binaries, dichotomies, but they're also spectrums. Smooth gating versus abrupt gating, and then implicit gating versus explicit gating. So what do I mean by that? Smooth versus abrupt is whether how much you notice that you're being gated. Let me think of this is an important distinction, so I want to make sure I say it right, but I'm very tired. And there's other things I need to do tonight. Let me check my laundry. So let's start with explicit versus implicit. Smooth and abrupt is wrong. Like maybe like soft and strict is a better way of saying it. So implicit versus explicit. We'll start with that. Implicit gating is when you might not notice that you're being gated, or you're being gated in ways that look like the gates can be opened. So let's kind of go on a spectrum. Some of the most implicit gating I can think of is Minecraft. You are gated by what you can do and where you can go by what materials you found. You cannot get diamonds until you have iron ore. And then you can't easily get obsidian until you have a diamond pickaxe. Right, so iron ore gets you iron pickaxe gets you diamonds get you diamond pickaxe more easily gets you obsidian, and then you can go to the nether. There's a whole bunch of new stuff there. It's a very implicit gating. You never think, especially as a new player, oh, I can't get to the nether because of this. There's not something that says pay 5 diamonds to get to the nether. Each thing is very smoothly gated. Each thing smoothly progresses. Going a little bit less implicit, you have things like, the classic Metroidvania style, where it's like, hey, if you could slide, you would clearly slide under this short wall there. So you know that when you get the slide, you'll be able to go back there. Oh, this is too high up. Maybe if I get a double jump, I'll be able to get up there. So it's implicit in that, technically speaking, there's nothing preventing you from going there. There's no wall or anything. It's just that you can't go there yet for some reason. For some organic reason. I think that's a good way of saying it. Compared to, say, explicit gating, where you have doors. Hey, you're going to need a key to get this door. Okay, there is something blatant blocking you. And then the most explicit are like Pokemon's stupid arbitrary things that will block your routes. Like, oh, there's a Snorlax. I guess the Snorlax is kind of implicit because there's like a flute, but like, oh, here's just a bunch of Slowpoke. They're standing there. They'll go away at some point. It's like, okay, so I can't go this way. You're forcing me on this path. So incredibly explicit gating. And then soft gating versus strict gating is when the game lets you do a thing, but you really shouldn't do the thing. So like soft gating is like in Shin Megami Tensei when you have the open world, or in other JRPGs when you have an open world and you're like, oh, I can go anywhere. And then you go somewhere and the game's like, hey, these enemies are 20 times stronger than you. And it's like, why did you let me go here? Open world, you're totally free to do whatever. So that's really soft gating. And then strict gating is like, you cannot go here until you have done this thing. And there's a lot to think about here because there's nothing wrong with explicit gating. There's nothing wrong with soft gating or strict gating, It's just a matter of what happens afterwards. For example, soft gating that I mentioned is a frustrating example. But soft gating can be satisfying if you push through and if there's a reward for pushing through. So a soft gate feels like you needs a stronger reward. I think another interesting example of a soft gate, and this one's a very soft gate, is in the Mega Man series. There are 8 bosses that you can fight in any order. But especially if you know the pattern, each of the boss's weapons that you get after fighting the boss is typically good against another boss. So it's kind of a soft gate if you do things in a certain order, you can get rewarded for it. So if you push through a hard boss without the proper weapon, maybe you'll get the weapon that makes a different boss a lot easier. In that case, it's like a multi-directional gate. Again, it's a very soft gate. It's not even really a gate, but it's a way you can progress more easily. Might not have been the best example, but my point is, if you can go anywhere, but there's an area that you shouldn't go to, and you still manage to succeed, the reward should feel really good. Whereas if it's a very strict gate, go here, then go here later, it feels like, in a way, it's more natural. Once you know that the gate is there, you can attune your expectations. For instance, if there's a door, you're not expecting anything super exciting past the door. If you're going to a whole new world, you're expecting something more exciting at that whole new world. So a strict gate tells you what's coming next, and you can kind of assess your level of excitement depends on what you think is going to happen next after that strict gate. The soft gate, kind of like you're testing the game. You're like, oh, you don't want me to go here, huh? Well, I can, and I'm going to, and there better be something good after I do it, because otherwise I'm going to be pissed. Going back to the idea of an implicit gate versus an explicit gate, with very implicit gates, ones that you might not even notice are there, you don't really expect that much of a payoff. But something, especially once you're genre savvy with Metrovanias, you've seen all these areas you can slide. You're expecting something after you get through the gate, but you're not really. Maybe you're going to a whole new area, maybe not. But what you expect is kind of proportional to how powerful you feel after overcoming that gate. So, like, I think that's one of the reasons that, getting the slide in the Castlevania type game doesn't usually get you anywhere as exciting as a double jump, because a double jump feels more powerful. I'm getting very kind of abstract here. Man, this would be a lot better if I recorded this while I was awake. That's okay, that's what part 2 is for. And then when you have a very explicit gate, you have more explicit expectations. So, like, when you have a gate like a door, again, with the idea of a strict and something strict and explicit like a door, you expect there to be something interesting behind the door. If there's a portal to another world, you expect it to be very exciting, right? If you slide under a short wall in Castlevania and there's a whole new area, awesome. If there's just an item, cool. Whatever, it's fine. You knew this was there. You had a sense of what's behind it. Whatever. But when the gate is something very explicit, and especially when it's something exciting and explicit, there's a lot more expectation. And that expectation kind of does need to be met. I've kind of talked about like some gating mechanisms. Like, what's another gating mechanism? Another gating mechanism is Zelda style. You get an item that lets you go to a place that lets you do a thing. And you get the hook shot, so you can do this temple. You may have seen these rocks before in Pokemon. Well, now you have strength, so now you can push these rocks. So it tends to be pretty strict gating. You need cut to get through here. You need hook shot to get through here. It's strict, but it's also pretty implicit. You can see it coming. especially in the Pokemon case. You can see it coming. You're the way I'm thinking of it. Because you see it coming, you're not that anticipatory. I need to think of a better term for implicit versus explicit, because I think I'm overlapping. Because the tree, like a Pokemon cut tree, is very explicit. But it's also I guess part of my idea on the implicit explicit spectrum is the new game. Let's call it the new game plus rule. If you were doing a new game plus, would this still be blocking you? Right? Some of the things like a slide attack, double jump, having certain items, those are all, if you had them in new game plus, you could go through the game faster. Whereas there are certain gates that are stops, like you cannot go to the castle until you have beaten this boss. So that's a very explicit stopped gate. So I think that's kind of one confounding those a little bit. But I think that still holds true. The more explicit the gate, the more you expect to happen afterwards, especially if that gate is blocking a lot of your view. I guess the more explicit and the more strong the gate, the more you have expecting going through. And yet paradoxically, if you have a soft gate, you also expect a lot going through. So in some ways, things that are implicit and strict gates are the ones that require the least payoff. It's a door. You've seen this door before. Maybe if you have no idea what's behind the door, it's very explicitly blocking you. But if it's a door where you can kind of see a room behind it, or it's just any old door, you just happen to have a key for it, it's probably just a treasure room. Again, implicit's not the right word, but I guess maybe weak. It's a weak gate? I don't know. I'll ponder this before my next part. But anyway, so if it's strict and it's implicit, you don't need as much payoff usually. If it's soft, you need a reward for getting past the gate. And if it's extremely explicit, you've had more of a build-up of expectation because you were told not to go there. So soft is intense. Explicit is intense. Strict is less intense because it's an expectation. It's something that you're already looking for, and implicit is something you're already looking for. Soft gives you challenge in a way of break the game. Explicit gives you challenge in this is clearly the next part of something bigger. Whereas strict and implicit is the next part but something smaller. I think that's a better dichotomy. It took me like 10 minutes to get there, but the question is like, what's a very explicit soft gate? Something that you expect there to be a really big payoff. I think of it as, like a good example of that is say hidden dungeons, or that a really hard boss that you encounter on a path, where it may be a sequence break or maybe an optional boss, but you come across this thing, and if you push past it, it's a very directly, here's a new thing, a new pathway that you have access to. I think Dark Souls is, by its open nature, full of these soft, explicit gates, where you're gated by your ability to go here or not here, but at the same time, it's very obvious that you are being blocked off. Like when you go in Dark Souls, when you go down that little path and all of a sudden there's a billion skeletons and they just wreck your shit. Yeah, you can go down that way, and it's an explicit path that way. So soft gate explicit, you expect something big to be at the end of it. And again, like strict implicit, you cannot dig gold until you have iron. But it's not super exciting to get gold. It's just like, cool, that was the next piece. Again, strict and explicit, probably one of the most common kinds. Soft and implicit. Let me see if I can think of soft but implicit. I would say soft but implicit is a lot of stuff that you can get in Pokemon when you have Surf, right? Implicit, you've been seeing it all around. It's not directly blocking you from an endpoint, and it's it's still pretty strict because you can't do it until you have Surf, right? I guess maybe you see an area with a bunch of trainers, and they might be harder than your average trainer. Like, you know, maybe it's an area that you can get to before defeating the gym leader. You're kind of expected to go there after being the gym leader. I think there's some like paths on like bridges that you see in Pokemon sometimes, particularly in the earlier games. Yeah, I think actually there's the one path I think before you fight Misty, maybe, where there's the whole gauntlet, and at the end of it, I think you get a nugget or something. I don't know. I don't think you need to do that before fighting Misty, but I don't quite recall. Anyway, it's soft in that you can go that way, and it's implicit in that, yeah, there's a path that you can go, but you can see what's on the other side. You have a general sense of what's coming. You don't have to go through there, you know. Anyway, that's a lot of rambling. But my point is, I think this provides us with an interesting way to discuss things that are blocking players and why those things might lead to player expectation of certain levels of payoff. And I'm gonna sleep on this because I'm very tired. But if you watched all this, thanks. Probably shouldn't have. But I'll kind of recap this a little bit in the next one and be awake and hopefully more coherent. Anyway, hope you enjoyed me kind of like thinking out loud on this a little bit. Hope even if I didn't like come to any conclusions, I hope that maybe this sparked some thoughts of your own. And until next time, double bite out.